My name is Catherine Haskins, and I am one of the co-founders of the Bridge Club. My fellow co-founder is...
I'm Brenda Andrews. Hi.
And so we have brought the Bridge Club, we founded the Bridge Club 3 years ago with the notion of bringing the profession together to connect, engage, learn, and grow. And tonight is a perfect example of that, where we're bringing forth a conversation that is critically important in these trying times, if you will. We're breaking some of our rules. First rule of the Bridge Club is bring a beverage. So as we're seeing from the chat, people are doing it. So check mark on there. Second rule of the Bridge Club is that you turn on your cameras. So if you can, please do turn them on. It makes a big difference in what we are talking about and be able to see your faces as well. We also typically do not mute, but tonight we're going to ask that everyone remain on mute. And that is because we have so much to talk about. We're going to use the chat function for all of your questions. Now, tonight is also very interesting because we have some key things we do need to cover off with the AVMA. There may be questions that the AVMA isn't able to answer right now because things are moving so very quickly. And also, there may be things that they are not the authority to answer on. So if you see that we potentially don't answer your question, we're going to gather all those questions together and get them to the right people to help get you the answer that you need. So I do want to make sure that if you're like, wait a second, how is that kind of moving ahead as we do it? So what we do want to say is there's a lot to cover here, so just keep using the chat function and we'll bring those forward. Brenda, have I forgotten anything before we start with our toast?
I'm going to be monitoring the chat, guys, and I want to say in advance, there are going to be a lot of questions, and we aren't going to be able to get to all of them, so please do accept our apologies that we'll be pulling out a few of them. But we will be giving, as Catherine said, all of the questions to the AVMA so they'll know what's top of mind for you. And then, if Gail survives this next week, hopefully we can have her come back and do another one of these for us again soon. All right. So
with that in mind, we are so fortunate. We had talked with the AVMA about bringing this topic forward, and what was on the agenda a week ago is different than it is tonight. And that's because everything is moving so fast. And what we want you to also know is that when this video plays, there will be a timestamp indicating this is information as of this date. Recognize, always go back to the AVMA for any updated information. We think it's really critically important. Part of the reason that Gail is losing her voice is that she is working 24/7 on behalf of the profession. So I do want to make sure that we are doing a huge debt of gratitude to the AVMA and Dr. Gail Golab for coming and doing this with us. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Gail for us to do a toast, and then we're going to quickly jump into where we're going to go.
Okay, that sounds great. And Catherine and Brenda, thank you so much for the opportunity to do this. It's great to be able to communicate with folks, and I want to make sure that you all know that we're here for you. So before I actually do the toast, I just wanted to give a shout out to all those first responders. We owe them so much, the folks that are on the front lines. They need our respect, they need our patience, and most of all, they need our prayers. And so shout out to them first. But among those first responders are veterinarians, no question about it. And if there's been a neat thing that's come out of this whole situation, it's seeing the ingenuity of the profession. It doesn't matter if you're in the companion animal medicine, food supply, laboratory, if you're working for a manufacturer, doesn't matter. Everybody has been so incredibly creative. So my toast tonight, my toast is coffee, because that is kind of what I am running on at this point. So let's raise our mugs, glasses, whatever you happen to have, to those first responders and to the veterinary profession. What an opportunity for us to step up and to shine. And what an opportunity for us to come together. And that's really what veterinary medicine is all about.
Cheers, everybody.
For all of us.
So here's what we are going to do. We're going to cover off on three main areas this evening. And so the first area we're going to kind of talk about is what the AVMA is doing to help practices. We're specifically going to dive into the essential business. So hopefully that, think of your questions around the essential business. Then we're going to actually dive into the protective aware and get your questions regarding that, because Gail's going to give us some information on the personal protective equipment. And then finally, we're going to jump into the whole notion of telemedicine and DCPRs. So much has changed, and it changes on the minute now. So get those questions ready, but we're going to hit them in that order, so that'll help you a little bit as we go forward. So Gail, let's really jump in. Obviously, your voice is gone from as a result of working 24/7. Let's dive into how you're supporting the profession in these dire times, and specifically, let's then talk a little bit about the essential business.
Sure. And so, obviously one of AVMA's big function is to make sure that veterinary practices can continue to do what we do best, right, which is to deliver animal care. And if we think about what essential businesses are, those are the businesses that are going to stay open in an environment when we're attempting to flatten the curve. So everybody's heard talking about that, right? So we know the primary mode of transmission of COVID-19 is human-to-human contact. And so there's been an effort across the country at this point to minimize those businesses, or to close those businesses that have the most human-to-human contact. And so getting veterinary medicine recognized as an essential business and allowing it to operate in such a way that it minimizes that human-human contact is incredibly important. So we've been working with our state veterinary medical associations to do that. And I actually have a request and a reach out for you tonight. If you have an opportunity to speak to local or state officials, talk to them about the importance of veterinary medicine and the services that we deliver to make sure that we continue to stay open for our patients and for our clients.
So talk me through, I guess, and maybe I'm a bit naive in this, but what's the difference between an essential business and an essential service?
Sure. So essential businesses are those businesses that are absolutely necessary for supporting a community. And so obviously there are things that we all need to do, right? We all need to eat. We all need to be able to access healthcare. And that's where veterinary medicine fits in. But even though we're an essential business, even essential businesses will offer services that may not be absolutely necessary at this particular point in time. So, for example, if you think about a restaurant, it's necessary for them to be able to provide food, but they might not have to provide it in a dining room, right? They can provide it via takeout, provide access that way. The same thing goes for veterinary medicine. What are those things that we really have to do that are absolutely necessary for our patients? And we deliver those services preferentially and make some choices that way. And one of the things that's really important about that, though, is that understanding that what is essential may vary depending upon what area you are in, and thinking not only about the patient in front of you, but also about aspects, for example, of public health. And so people will ask the question, are vaccines an essential service? Well, yeah, they are, particularly in the case of rabies, and depending upon the area you're in and the situation of your individual patient, that may indeed be an essential appointment. And so you really need to use professional judgment. And so a lot of people have asked us about, is AVMA going to come out with a list of essential services? And to this point in time, we haven't, because we really believe that veterinarians, they need to be able to use their professional judgment, and they're the ones that have the best idea of what's necessary for the patient in front of them.
So that's really good. Do you think that could happen, where that's going to be mandated to help really provide that guidance?
So it's been very interesting. We've been obviously watching the human side of this activity as well as the veterinary side. And we certainly have seen the human medical associations come out with certain categories of types of procedures and some very broad generalizations of situations. And so we may see some of those kinds of orders coming out. And we are starting to see a little bit of that with people providing examples. Again, we haven't seen specific lists at this point. And I think one thing that makes us maybe a little bit different than human medicine is the fact that we do have some of those procedures like rabies vaccinations and that kind of thing that cross the interface between human and veterinary medicine. And so the considerations are slightly different.
So it is interesting in the chat where saying where they're doing different things or what are being seen. So you're seeing such a wide variety as well, just across the country. And so it is really important that everyone's getting to their state associations. I did want to call out a website, and maybe Michael can put it in there since I'm making sure we're moving ahead. But it's the avma.org/coronavirus. And what can people find there, Gail?
So we have a ton of resources there. One of the most popular resources at the moment is actually a case management flowchart. And that case management flowchart is based on social distancing, and it actually takes you through a very logical process when you have a patient come in front of you that allows you to make some decisions about that patient. So, for example, it'll ask you to consider whether or not telemedicine might be an option. It asks you to look at whether or not the owner of that particular animal may have COVID-19 or have been exposed to COVID-19, whether or not what the animal is being presented for is something that needs to be done right now, or whether that's something that can be reasonably postponed. It points you to resources in your community, and so talks about when the situation is such that you should be consulting with local public health officials, all of those kinds of things. Just a very logical process.
So that's awesome. What I want to quickly do is just in this category of essential services and the support of the AVMA, if you've got a question before we pivot to our next, see how quickly time moves. We're already at 7:15 and we want to be sure we hit all the topics. So please put those questions in the chat right now. So we'll give a second to make sure that if anyone has any additional questions, or Brenda, if you saw any that had come through.
Well, they're coming fast and furious. I was just about to text everyone and say, for those of you who have been a little bit late, I just want to say we have 3 main topics we're trying to cover with Dr. Golab tonight, and we only have a very limited time for questions. So please do forgive us if we're not able to get to your question. I'm going to try to pick a few out that seem to be popping up with some frequency. So, you know, don't be mean if we don't get to your question specifically. So,
Nice twist. So I do think the last one I saw was, you know, with the PPE. So let's dive a little bit into that, shall we? I mean, I think people are really curious about, you know, with the shortage of what they're talking about on the news, et cetera. So let's talk about how, you know, the AVMA, your efforts into support access to and the conservation of these critical personal protective equipment and medications. So give us what's kind of happening on that end.
Sure, and there's really 2 big areas that we're working in here. One, we actually started a couple of months ago. We started to see what was going on over in China. We knew that it was likely that this was going to head to the United States. So we started working with FDA right away, looking at what potential supply chain squeezing there might be at that point, and working with manufacturers and distributors to see if there was anything that was already in short supply and to try to find some alternatives there. And so we're continuing to provide that information as we're getting practices and also getting it from those major distributors as to what kinds of things are short and working with FDA to identify alternatives. The good news is that on a drug side, that doesn't seem to be a huge issue at this point. It's all on the medical supply side. So it's all the masks and the gowns and the gloves and that kind of thing that are in short supply, just like what you're seeing on the TV. And because of that, we need to do 2 things. We need to make sure, of course, that our responders on the human side have access to what they need to protect themselves and to treat those human patients. But we also need to make sure that veterinarians can continue to provide their services. And honestly, if you compare the amount of PPE that we use compared to what is used on the human side, it's considerably smaller. And in some cases, it's slightly different than what they would normally use. And so one of the best things that practices can do is to really think about how they're using PPE and to look at those strategies that they can to conserve that. And so one of the things that we've done on AVMA's website is to provide resources from FDA, from CDC, and we've even taken that guidance where they provide some information about how do we use these things and how to conserve these things, and tried to adapt that to veterinary medicine. So there's a document on there that's actually specific to veterinary medicine that should be very helpful. We're definitely seeing a shift toward cloth gowns, cloth drapes, even cloth masks, things that can be laundered, sterilized, that kind of thing. We're seeing veterinary practices that are looking more closely at how they are doing certain procedures and when certain personal protective equipment can be reused. And so, for example, extending the use of masks, and also even looking at, when can we cut back on that a little bit? When is it safe to do so, both for ourselves and for our patients?
So one of the questions that did just pop in, since you said that there are some practices utilizing, the cloth masks, does the AVMA have a stance specifically on that, or is that all ebb and flowing right now because things have changed so quickly and it's based on supply?
Yeah, it's very much in flux right now. As a matter of fact, like 2 hours ago, we were on the phone with FDA because we are looking for other alternatives. For example, trying to figure out whether or not there was a reasonable way to re-sterilize gloves. And so they're looking at that kind of information as well. And so my best advice would be continue to check AVMA's website. We literally put resources up yesterday afternoon that we have modified again this morning and have reposted this afternoon. With those
and in fact, Michael just posted some guidelines here in the chat as well, guys. So as we have guidelines that help answer some of these questions, we'll pop them in here for you.
But I do want to remind everybody that everything is changing moment by moment. So there may be questions that you've got in here that there may not be answers to as a result of how fast things are moving. And I am so excited to see how quickly this chat is definitely filling up. I feel bad for my business partner who's monitoring it all. So
Catherine, there is one other thing that's probably worth mentioning with respect to PPE that we started to see today. And that is we're starting to see state governments reach out to state veterinary medical associations, asking them to ask their veterinarians what they have in stock and what they might be able to donate. And so we've been encouraging the state veterinary medical associations to work with their emergency management agencies, because we're also seeing a greater effort at the federal level to start taking control of some of these emergency management functions as well. And so the more coordinated that can be, the better off it is for everybody. At the same time, as we've been talking with FDA, we've been very cognizant of the fact that whereas we want to be as supportive as we possibly can, we also need to make sure that we can continue to care for our own patients. And so FDA is very sensitive to the fact that we need that PPE as well. And we need to use it responsibly, but what we do need access to it. So they are looking for options for us in addition to what they're looking for human medicine.
No, that's a great addition, and thank you for that. Brenda, do we want to take a pause and if there are questions on the last two topics?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting, thank you, Michael, for listing the guidelines for personal PPE. And again, they are changing a little bit daily. There are a lot of questions coming in here about the differences from one jurisdiction to the next. And I don't know, Dr. Golab, if you can really answer that question beyond just, telling them where to try to go to look for the most recent information specific to where they live, knowing that every state is going to be a little bit different and it may even vary a little bit from one county to the next.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. There's definitely considerable differences between states. And yeah, even within states, particularly some of the larger states that have concentrated cities, for example, they're going to be different than what is happening in some of those rural areas. I would say your best sources of information are going to be your state veterinary medical association and your state veterinary medical board. And it's really important to stay in touch with both of those, because even though we're in this emergency situation, we still do have responsibilities to that State Practice Act. And so making sure you stay in touch with what's going on with your state board and the direction that they're issuing is really, really important.
Yeah.
Any additional, Brenda, you want to bring forth?
Yeah, I think there's some great questions that are in here that basically will be appropriate as we get a little bit. People are kind of ahead of the curve on some of the things that I know Dr. Golab is going to talk about. So I think in the interest of so much great information that she wants to share and the questions that we have, let's keep moving.
Okay.
And I'll pop them in.
So one of the
great questions, guys. Thank you very much.
One of the biggest things that popped this week, it started last week with Oregon, was about the VCPR and all of the telemedicine. So, back us up a little bit and then kind of take us on the journey that you have been through over the last 14, 18 days with regard
Sure. So yeah, the telemedicine piece, every time you have a situation like this, there's always some things that are very cool that actually come out of it. And it's hard to remember that when you're in the middle of it. But telemedicine is one of those. Telemedicine has presented such great opportunities for veterinary medicine, but not everybody has been totally excited about it or recognized its possibilities. And we're in a situation now where, frankly, we've sort of had to do that. And so we're seeing veterinarians across the country that are taking the opportunity to use telemedicine to make sure they still can continue to care for their patients and that can still continue to work with their clients, while at the same time they're minimizing that direct human-to-human contact. And so we're learning a lot about what the technology is capable of doing, and we're also learning a lot more about our comfort level with the technology. And so, but one of the things that's been happening, and of course, one of the big questions around this has always been the veterinarian client-patient relationship. And there are about a half dozen states or so at this point that have loosened veterinarians' ability to work within that VCPR. Sometimes it's a question of extending the length of time that VCPR applies. So, for example, moving it from like 12 months to 18 months, since you may have seen that particular patient. In some cases, it's understanding that there may be emergency situations where you may have to deal with a patient without actually having seen that patient in person. In most cases, that's able to be accomplished under an emergency provision, and some states have issued emergency provisions in order to allow veterinarians to do that. At the federal level, it was really interesting yesterday because FDA, as we all know, we have our VCPR at the state level, but we also have a federal VCPR. And that federal VCPR applies in certain circumstances. So it applies when we are using medications in an extra label way, and it applies when we are doing veterinary feed directives, and so on the food animal side. And so what FDA has done is issued a temporary suspension of their enforcement with respect to the requirement for in-person or premise visits for those actions. One of the things that I want to make sure that I'm very clear about is that this is temporary. This is not a permanent change in the federal VCPR. It's also the case that this does not allow veterinary feed directives to use extra label products. So they still have to follow the rules for veterinary feed directives. What's been changed is whether or not they need to have that in-person or regular visits to the facility piece of that. The other thing is that even though on the federal level for those areas that FDA has issued discretion, that's not necessarily the case on the state level. So you may still be in a state, and that's why it's so important to make sure you're communicating with your state board, where your VCPR that requires that in-person visit may still apply. And if that's the case, then you still will need that in-person visit. And in some cases, you need that in-person visit within a certain period of time. Depends upon what it says in your Practice Act and the regulations associated with that. So you also have to make sure that in addition to the Practice Act, that you are following any regulations that are required for issuing pharmaceuticals.
So I just want to clarify that. Yeah. So again, so people are hearing that. So unlike on some regulations, if the federal government says something, it doesn't supersede anything of the state. In this regard, the state could supersede the federal government with regards to the VCPR.
Right. And what you have to remember is that federal VCPR applies to certain activities. So it applies to extra label drug use, and it applies to the issuing of veterinary feed directives. That state VCPR applies to activities across the board that are within your state Practice Act. So even if the federal one is loosened, if your state one has not been, you need to abide by that state VCPR. So you have to follow both.
So I'm going to tie in a couple of questions here, Dr. Golab, that I think kind of work a little bit together. So if a veterinary practice is remaining open and trying to do business as usual in order to stay afloat, and rather than go to telehealth or something like that, and the state guidelines are saying emergency only, can that practice, can they get in trouble? Can they have their license be put at risk for not following the state guidelines at that given time? Making sense?
So, yeah, so I think this is a difficult question because in this particular situation, in most cases, people are reasonable. So they understand that this is an unusual situation. And so they are going to evaluate what it is that you're doing in light of that particular situation. So again, it gets back to a matter of professional judgment. It does not give you the ability to not adhere to regulations, but you also have to pay attention to that patient that's in front of you, and you need to make decisions accordingly. And so even though, for example, with telemedicine, that we're in a period of COVID-19, if we were not in a period of COVID-19, you would want to make sure that if you were using telemedicine, you were using it in a way that was appropriate for the case presentation in front of you. And telemedicine doesn't work for everything, and it doesn't work for everything now either. Now is just your opportunity to use it a bit more than perhaps what you would be using it normally. But again, it has to be in compliance with regulations, and it needs to be in compliance with the patient in front of you.
So one of the
Thank you for asking the question. I know that's a little bit of a difficult one, but I think that there's so many people who are asking similar questions. It just felt like it would make people feel a little bit at ease to hear from an official voice with regard to that.
So a couple of people are asking resources as well. So is there a resource on the AVMA's website that shows all the state regulations, or do they need to go to their state board and they need to go to their state association and really find out where they stand?
So one of the things that we've tried to do, and on the coronavirus pages on the website, is we have information on those pages specifically related to telemedicine. And what we have tried to do is we have tried to link information in specific orders from states that apply to that, so that you can click there directly. That is, if they posted that, not all of them have, but you can click directly to find that information there if there has been a change in that. And as soon as we find out that there has been, we try to update that and get that included there.
No, that's really good. There's things, I guess, Victoria's put in there, that there's emergency provisions by some states. Please check with your state board. I think it's really critically important on this topic. So, this is a little visionary, and it's probably unfair for us to ask you this question because your world is changing daily. But do you, or I shouldn't even say daily, I should say hourly, but with more practices experimenting and playing with telemedicine, do you really see this becoming, part of the toolkit that professionals will use later?
I don't think there's any question that it's becoming part of the toolkit. And again, the thing that's been really interesting is that even though these emergency orders are there in some places, the vast majority of what is being done is practiced within the VCPR, even now. And so I think that's a great example that when this emergency is over, and I know we hope that it's over as quickly as possible, right? But it doesn't mean that when it's over that we stop using this, because we're having an opportunity to demonstrate how well it works. And it's another tool in our toolkit to make sure we provide great care for our patients and that we continue to stay connected with our clients.
No, I think that's fantastic. And you guys also just shared recently on LinkedIn, and I know it's probably under the COVID-19, like all the different telemedicine companies that exist, so people could see a comparison on those as well. So do encourage you to look at the AVMA website for that information. More questions on your side, Brenda, so we can make sure that we are, the very end of her voice, I think, is coming near. So I want to be very careful.
And, I hope everybody agrees that, Dr. Golab is giving us a lot of information and trying to put it in bite-sized pieces because we just don't have the time here on this particular venue to go through everything. So it looks like we're doing a really good job of answering some of the questions about the VCPRs and the telehealth. A lot of questions about state by state. And again, folks, the AVMA is trying to help give you guidance on a state-by-state basis. So go to their website to find out the latest, or go to your own VMA to find out what is happening right now in your state, because it's hard to keep track of what's happening across 50 states on any daily basis. So, to all of you who are asking about things specific to your very own state, just go to your VMA or go to the AVMA's page and see if there's information posted specific to that.
The one thing I want to mention is, if you need ideas about how you potentially could use telemedicine or examples of that, in addition to the coronavirus pages, we also have a telemedicine section, and that's /telemedicine. So lots of information as well.
So that's actually great, because someone was asking the idea of like, who makes that appropriate determination as to the telemedicine piece. So I do have one kind of final area I'd like us to cover off on if we can. I know we're running out of time here, but one of the things that Brenda and I are very, very passionate about is checking in on our colleagues and really making sure that we are all okay. So actually, before we have you answer anything, I would love people to give us a thumbs up or thumbs this way or thumbs down. If you need anything, we are here for you. This is really challenging times. And so just knowing that you guys know that and if you need anything, please let us know. But talk to us about the AVMA's efforts in this regard, because our people on the front lines are really, really facing a lot of stress right now.
Yeah, well, and we wanted to be sure when we put the information together about COVID-19 that we were paying attention to that as well. So at the same time that we're providing the technical information about how to keep veterinary teams healthy, we also have dedicated information on that page that's specifically related to well-being. So Dr. Jen Brandt, whom virtually everybody is familiar with, has pulled that information together. And she and Marcy Kirk have also worked together to create a podcast, which is actually really helpful. It's available at myveterinarylife.com. It's just released within the last few days. Definitely worth a listen. So yeah, those resources are there as well. And if you go to the actual well-being piece that's on the coronavirus page there, it will link you back to all of AVMA's resources on well-being that, of course, apply in this situation just like they apply elsewhere.
And I would say lots of call outs to Not One More Vet. Appreciate that. One Life Connected. There's many out there for people to be turning to. But it is, I think, one of the most important things is just ask how people are doing. I think that is probably the most important thing that we can be doing as a profession as we go through this. Any more questions on your side? Because I do want to be mindful of people's time this evening as well, Brenda.
No, I think we're getting everything pretty well, actually. I mean, Dr. Golab is doing such a fantastic job of anticipating all these questions that we're getting and giving us well-rounded answers that there aren't a whole lot of bits and pieces other than those that really get very specific. And again, we do apologize that we can't get into the specifics right now. We just don't have the time or bandwidth on this particular call. So thank you for your understanding.
But I do think that this is really valuable because everything is changing minute by minute. I'm sure 2 hours from now, all of a sudden, Gail's going to find something else has happened that all of a sudden completely. So what we want to be able to do is we are committed, as is the AVMA, to continue to provide these kinds of updates, but doing it in bite-sized chunks that make sense for everybody. So I appreciate seeing all the thank yous on there. That is fantastic. That is our purpose, is to help guide and bring more information. What would you like us to cover next will be my question to put into the chat, because that you would like to have AVMA's point of view on. Brenda and I have many other conversations coming along this path that deal with COVID-19, but is there any in particular that you would love to be able to have us also dive in? Or is there one of these that you're like, could you just do a conversation on that? Open it up so people could be asking. So I do encourage you guys to throw those in there before we do our parting thoughts, because we did promise poor Dr. Gail that she could actually save her voice. So with that, while people are putting in things that they still want to hear, let's go ahead and do any parting thoughts, and we'll then turn it over to Brenda for a closing toast.
Sure. So I think I have a couple of them. One of them is a thank you. I have to say that the amount of support that AVMA has had from veterinarians and from its members while we've been trying to provide these resources has really been amazing. Personal reach out to the association, so appreciated. Anything that you need that we can help you with, if you send email to coronavirus@avma.org, we will try our best to develop those resources for you. And the ideas for the things that we have produced so far have come from veterinarians. They've come from our members. They've come from those that are on the front lines. And so everything that we're doing to try to help support you in your practices. So you can ask questions there as well. The other thing, we mentioned it earlier, but supporting each other, listening to the other members of your teams, taking a minute to stop and take a breath. You have to. It may feel like you can't, but you absolutely have to. Being smart about how you're practicing, making sure that you're taking care of your patients, but that you're also taking care of yourself. Because if you don't take care of yourself, there's not going to be anybody to take care of your patients. And so everybody loses that way. So anyway, thank you all for everything you're doing. You guys are on the front lines. It's been amazing. Every segment of the profession, cannot believe ingenuity. Fantastic. Absolutely. Have never been prouder to be a veterinarian.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, Miss Brenda, we've got a few things to let people be aware of. The financial impact, I see that one keeps showing up. We are going to be covering that. We are working on the final date on that. If anyone needs a break and needs to connect with someone on a human level, Friday at 5 o'clock, go to our website. We have an open Zoom. It's a happy hour. We're calling it the Quarantini virtual happy hour. You don't have to register. Just come in and join. Brenda and I promise to make you laugh at least 3 times. So that way you can start your weekend. But it is critically important that you have a place to be able to go if you need it. And we are here for that. And with that, I will turn it over to Brenda for our closing toast.
All right. Yes, it is a tradition of the Bridge Club that we begin and end every conversation with a toast because we want you to feel welcomed coming in and we want you to feel loved on the way out. So I'm going to close with one of my very favorite quotes here that I think is appropriate to this situation. It's from Winnie the Pooh, A.A. Milne, and it's, "You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think." So cheers to surviving this chaos. We know we will, and we'll do it together. So cheers to all of you.
Cheers. Cheers.
Sure.
And with that, everybody, you are able to have your evening. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Brenda or I, Brenda at thebridgeclub.com, Catherine at thebridgeclub.com, and we are happy to help. We are here for you guys if you need anything whatsoever. But with that, you guys have a great, great evening. And thank you, Dr. Golab. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you so much.